Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about the database access control. So let's start with it. Database access control is a process of managing and regulating whether who has the access to the data and what kind of access do they have. Are they able to modify the data, write on the data, or read the data, or do whatever they wanted to do with the data? That's done through the authorization. Now, by implementing the access control measure, organization can protect the integrity and the confidentiality of the data and not giving the access to the unauthorized users. So, which is very important in today's era. Access control system is an important factor in managing the security and confidentiality of the information of the organization information systems. Access control system can protect against the leakage, alteration, and the destruction of the sensitive information by enforcing the policies that the control user has the access to only a specific kind of resources and whether the control user are giving the access to other resources or not. So access control policies, when we are talking about, first comes the defining, laying down the foundation, rules and regulations, then comes the implementation. Now you have to actually make those rules and regulation and come make them in play into the picture. Then comes the enforcing part of it. When we are talking about the enforcing part of it, it happens to be like, are the people following the rules and regulation that we have laid out for our system, and how maintenance and all of those works that comes under the enforcing of it. Now, different types of data access control systems. When we are talking about, first comes the discretionary access control. When we are talking about the discretionary access control, the access is completely given to the owners. Owners means us, whether we want to grant, now it's upon us whether we want to grant the permissions to the other users, like they could view our data, delete it, or modify it. But there comes the liability with it. Now, first, not every user is such advanced. There could be users that are naive. They could end up providing the access to the information that is very crucial and very sensitive to the user, which could harm them. So when it comes to the discretionary access, that is the liability that giving all the ownership to the owners. And and now talking about the merits, we have it's highly flexible. Highly flexible means the owners have the complete right to write, read, or do whatever they wanted to do with their information. And it's good for the small businesses. If you are having a small organization, small business, go for the discretionary access. Then comes the mandatory access control. Now, mandatory access control is a central authority that defines the security level for the data when we're talking about. Now, what I mean by is, if you have done the object-oriented programming, we have classes, we have the access modifier, which could be private, protected, internal. So we are setting the variables, either they could be private, protected, internal, and so on and so on. So we are labeling the data. When we are labeling the data, it comes under the mandatory access control. Now, if the priority of your system is security, go for the mandatory access. It's less flexible as there is the protection and all, and and there is the predefined label. So when we're talking about the mandatory, it is less flexible than the discretionary ones. Now, if and again, if you are going for the protection is your main concern, go for the mandatory. It's the best for that. Now comes the role-based access control. Now, what is role-based access control? We have predefined roles. Now, what I mean by that, take for example, we have an organization, we have a manager, we have an employee there. And when we're talking about the manager is given with certain authorization to access this data, and the employer has given the access to is authorized to access this data. If you're talking about the employee, the employer won't have the same authorization as the manager because the manager is superior to the employee. So here plays the role-based access. It depends on what role you have and what then your authorization is defined basis on that. So it's like clear from the role-based. Now it's the simplified management than the discretionary one because roles are divided. It's upon them how they are going to deal with it, and it's limited granularity. Now, what I mean by that is like you don't have the access to the smallest attributes. For example, you won't have the small because there's an example of the manager and employee. So employee won't have the smallest everything little bit detail of everything what the manager has. So here the granularity is very limited. Now talking about the attribute based access control system. Now when we're talking about the attribute based access control system, it's all depend on the runtime. Now what I mean by if you're talking, take an example of location for example. Location, you will get the location at the particular instance, won't you? So that is when we're talking about that, it comes under the attribute based access. Now, high granularity, just because you're getting the smallest, tiniest bit details from this. Now, if you want to make a complex system, go with the attribute access control. Now, how all of this is done? Firstly, we have the authentication, verifying the user before granting them access. Then, if you have granted them access, what kind of access do they have is done through the authorization. Then come the auditing part, tracking and monitoring the user activity and holding them accountable for that. Then comes the encryption part of it, like the security of the transit and resetting the data and all. Challenges and solutions. Access control is a key in maintaining the security and the confidentiality of the information in an organization system by enforcing the policies which I have discussed earlier, that the control user access to specific resources only due to the authorization. Access control systems can protect against the leakage, alteration, or the destruction of the sensitive information. In conclusion, now we have access control is crucial for information security and confidentiality. Thank you.